Hey there, and welcome to this, the 11th in our series of webinars focusing on emerging issues related to COVID-19. Today, the surprising challenges and important benefits of conversation during the pandemic. This month's shows have been sponsored by the home retailer Lowe's. We thank them for their support of these conversations during the month of May. I'm Leslie Boney, the director of the Institute for Emerging Issues at NC State, and each week we've been looking at a different aspect of this crisis. We've looked at small business, at entrepreneurship, at the impacts the crisis is having on mental health, on food and hunger, reaching those who are hard to reach during this crisis, what's going on with law enforcement and the courts, the impact on our religious life, the pathway back to work. And for each of those topics, we've asked what's happening to us in real time, how people are reacting to deal with the crisis. But then we ask people to look ahead and begin imagining the real-time changes we're going to need if we're going to move forward in a productive way. Thanks to you for joining us. We do these as webinars on Zoom, and we're also on Facebook Live. If you're listening live, we ask you to take full advantage of the opportunities here. There's an opportunity to chat. If you have ideas, or if you'd just like to reach out to somebody who else is on the call. If you'd like to ask a question, that's a good place to do it. You can also do it through the Q&A function. We'll get to as many of those as possible, but it's also a chance to just sort of have a discussion on the side, and that seems to happen every week. So some of you may not know that over the past 3 years, the Institute for Emerging Issues has been working on a project we call Reconnect NC. And that's a project where we're trying to figure out how to help North Carolina find its way back from different kinds of disconnection that we've experienced over the past couple of years. And as we were imagining that series, the first thing that we thought about, the most important thing we thought, was the importance of emphasizing citizen participation in our democracy. And as a key part of that, one of the things we identified was the importance of learning or relearning how to talk to each other across lines of divide. And we did that because of some troubling data. We weren't talking to each other. Instead, we were sort of cyber sniping. And what we discovered, even between 2015 and 2018, was a significant decline in the amount of trust we had in each other, in the media, in public institutions. We found that volunteering rates were down. Less than a quarter of people were volunteering with each other. The number of people working on projects with their neighbors was way down to 1 out of 20 or so. And fewer than half of people were donating to charity. So we launched an effort called Civic Conversations and started promoting the work through a series of meetings across the state. We worked with Leadership NC. Pierce Godwin helped us. Others helped us with a series of meetings, including Pettigrew. Our work there continues, and we have a fellow named Daryl Lester who's leading that work. But a lot of our work is championing the work of others, in particular those on the program. So we wanted to catch up with them today. Let me introduce you to them. Pierce Godwin is a founder of Listen First Project, which is a national effort that's devoted to mending the frayed fabric of America through conversation. Cyrus is an NC State senior working to jumpstart a series of conversations across political lines of divide on the NC State campus. He was an intern with the Institute for Emerging Issues last year. LB Prevette is a former guest of First and Future. She's serving as a civil society fellow with the Aspen Institute from her home in Wilkes County, and has been recognized by the Aspen Institute as a weaver. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Finally, Pettigrew is a founder and CEO of True Access, which has been leading a series of remarkable communications and conversations across lines of divide, beginning with an important series of conversations between the African American community and the law enforcement community in Cary. So thanks to you all for being here. Let me start with a question I'd like to hear from each of you on. You've all been staunch supporters of face-to-face conversation. You've talked about the importance of doing it over cups of coffee or in the same room or in a barbershop. And then the pandemic blew up that model. Pearce, you had a national day of listening planned. Cyrus, you had some plans to bring together Democrats and Republicans on the campus. True, you were hosting barbershop rap sessions and other efforts. LB, you'd created a sanctuary in your home in Wilkes County where people were getting together and were convening a series of meetings there. All that went away. And I'm wondering, before we move on to what you're doing now, if you could talk about why each of you believes that that face-to-face conversation makes such a difference. Maybe start with True.
Yeah, no, thank you. And thank you, Leslie, for having me. And again, it's a pleasure to be joined by all of these people who I know, love, and admire. So thanks for having me. And there's something about the power of our presence and being face-to-face with people, and the power that brings from having that social engagement and that social interaction with others. You can look into someone's eyes and you can read someone's body language and you can feel someone's presence, and there are dynamics that take place when you're there, even if it's the preliminary dialogue that you're able to have with someone before the session actually starts. And a lot of times it's that post conversation where I found is some of the rich insights and connections and solutions have been identified after I've been able to facilitate a discussion or facilitate a session. And then whether it's with me directly or people who otherwise would not have normally connected with one another are able to have some conversation based on something that they heard the other one say during one of those sessions. So those are things that you don't necessarily plan for, that happen naturally and organically when you're in the presence of others. And I just believe, and I know that there is a power in presence that we're losing out on. Now, there are also still some, obviously, benefits and things that I've identified that, hey, I could probably continue doing this moving forward, that we've discovered through our virtual channels and discoveries. But there is a lot of intangibles that we lose out on from having the power of our presence.
Cyrus, there's probably no time in our lives when we are in more conversations with more people with more time to do it than in college. And you had that pretty much taken away for the second half of this last semester.
Yeah, again, thank you for having me, Leslie. And I definitely agree with what True is saying about the power of presence. Just being in the same room as someone, there's so much more than what they're actually saying or what you might see on a camera through a laptop or phone, whatever it might be, that give clues as to how they're reacting to what you're saying, what they're thinking, how they're expressing themselves. And so I think it's kind of been a learning curve to go to this virtual setting, but like True is saying, it gives us some tools that we can use moving forward. And then on your point about having that uniquely taken away during college, I just think it's another learning experience that we've been able to grow from, so that hopefully when we get back, we're able to communicate in new ways. And this can be kind of a supplement to in-person, face-to-face contact.
LB, we talked earlier on the podcast first version of this show about some of the breakthroughs you've been able to make with people in your area who might have had preconceptions about you because you were able to talk with them face to face. So they may have an idea about who you are and what you are, but when you're face to face with them, there's something that you can discover, that you are people, and you may disagree on things, but that face to face seems to have some ability to tear down walls that might otherwise be built up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I think that when you have that face-to-face presence, you can feel authenticity. And too often when we're trying to convey meanings through writings and through video chats, we lose that. So much to what True was saying, you can feel that presence. And I think face-to-face meetings inherently are going to have a deeper sense of connection because we have inconvenienced ourselves to go out of our way to meet together in a place. So there's already like a commitment to each other. And so it's hard to figure out, how do we convey that when we can't feel that with each other?
Pierce, you had the biggest face-to-face meeting of the year planned that got canceled as a result of this. It was all about conversation. And you had as much experience as anyone exhorting and encouraging people to have this face-to-face get-together. What was it like to have to cancel the National Day of Conversation or to completely reformat it?
Yeah, it was certainly a challenge that none of us anticipated. Pales in comparison, to others, but all of us have found our lives and our works and our communities turned upside down. I'm reminded of John Haidt in The Righteous Mind saying, anything we can do to cultivate more positive social connections will alter reasoning and behavior. John also says the main way we change our minds is by interacting with other people. And I think, as my friends here have noted, those social connections, those interactions are just richer and just more powerful when you're face to face. And there's something that I'm not even sure you can put words on, but about that deeply human, closer than 6 feet connection, in which we can really understand where somebody is coming from, can really feel that presence. I love LB's point. We have gone out of our way by definition, unless they are, a spouse, to get in closer proximity to that person. So you can't replace it. I'm eminently grateful for the technology we're using right here, right now. If this was 1918, we wouldn't have this. We would have said, wow, we were going to have a National Week of Conversation, and now we're going to have nothing. Instead, thanks to technology, we were able to pivot. And what had been, an appreciated kind of second best method of connecting, one that, as True mentioned, has its advantages. I always talk about how this technology allows us to bridge geographic divides more readily than face to face. But that said, it has become the only show in town. And again, just one I do appreciate, even though it'll sure be nice when we're able to get closer together, and the connections will undoubtedly be more powerful then.
I'm going to come back to each of you, but let me just spend a few minutes with you, Pearce, talking about that pivot that you're alluding to. So on some level, there are more people in conversation than there ever have been. Can you talk about how this project has evolved over the past few weeks and gained new momentum and new followers and new energy?
Absolutely. One of the fortuitous things about, the rapid pivot we were able to make is that, as everybody on this call, knows, there was a lot of energy already building across the field. The Listen First Coalition of now over 300 organizations driving National Conversation Project for what would have been our third annual National Week of Conversation. Over the past, year or so, heard that David Brooks, who, many of us, read and appreciate, somebody said recently, Pierce, David Brooks is the most influential voice in America right now, and I wouldn't disagree. New York Times columnist, and he, through his own story, got to recommend the book Second Mountain. It was deeply moving for me. But started Weave, a social fabric project at the Aspen Institute, and LB will share more about her involvement with the Aspen Institute as well. But when I heard that David, whom I was familiar with, had started something about weaving our social fabric, that sounded awfully aligned with our mission, as you mentioned, Leslie, of mending our frayed social fabrics. I was excited to see how we might collaborate. And over the months, got together with David and his team and said, hey, wouldn't it be neat if the theme of National Week of Conversation 2020 was weaving community, and these kind of weaving-oriented conversations. And the theme specifically was going to be weaving community in a divided nation. So there was always already this real energy and traction towards that. There was already a Listen First Coalition kind of field-wide call scheduled for March 12th. And that was literally a couple days after I, and probably many of us, thought, hey, this is not staying over there. This coronavirus pandemic is coming here and going to have an impact where we are. And it's I hate to say laughable, but at the time it was just like, I'm not sure it's going to be the most prudent thing to tell people to come together in face-to-face conversations come April. Of course, that became unthinkable. But in that call, the leaders said, yes, this is obviously going to have an impact on National Week of Conversation. But what's more is that this is rapidly becoming not just a health and an economic crisis, but a social crisis here on our shores. So whatever we do, we're not going to wait until April 17th. We need to move now and have what in the frame of the National Conversation Project strategy we think of as a rapid response conversation. So within a few days and all-nighters, we had pivoted all of that energy into weaving community, not in a divided nation, but now during crisis, with its new website and so on and so forth. So that Weaving Community campaign that is celebrating acts of bravery, caring, and connection to heal the pain and weave the future we want is where the energy of our field and these hundreds of organizations has gone. But to your point, Leslie, I think like never before, all of us, to whatever degree our extroversion, whatever degree our entrenchedness may be in our stripes, political, demographic, and otherwise, we're missing that connection, and we're appreciating that need for social connection. We're feeling more isolated. We're feeling more lonely than ever before. Certainly my hope that, as David writes, is that this is not a time when we return to normal, but it's a new birth. It's a pause that creates that new birth out of the valley, and that we maintain that desire for social connection. We maintain that appreciation for what it means to be bonded and connected, especially within our communities. And that's what we're trying to encourage through this, Weaving Community campaign is connection, care, and creation. And that third point of creation, really speaks exactly to that. What is the life we want, and how can we work together to address those shared challenges going forward?
The best website, we're showing that now, to find more information about this is weaving.us. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
All right. So if someone would like to join, they can either reach out to you at the email that we see, Pearce at weaving.us, or go to weaving.us or hashtag weaving community. Pearce, we'll come back to you in just a minute, but you alluded to the work that the Aspen Institute is doing and this coalition that's kind of forming out of this, and the idea of weaving. And we have with us an officially designated weaver. LB Prevette, you were named by the Aspen Institute as a weaver, and it had nothing to do with the loom that's probably in the back of your house there. Can you talk about what that has meant, and the pivot that you've had to make in the work that you're doing in Wilkes County since the shutdown?
Absolutely. So weaving within the Aspen Institute was a relatively new idea. And when I first became looped into the organization and partnering with them, I really couldn't understand it, because for me, that's just how people live. You just talk to people and you just socialize with them and get to know them. So it provided a shared language for us to talk about what does make Wilkes County different. Why is our town so good at this? And for me, really in light of COVID, it's changed, because we prided ourselves on always creating big, public, informal gatherings. It's open to anyone. We don't have an agenda. We don't want a specific outcome. We simply want you to be in fellowship. We want people to gather. And in the shift to COVID, when you're reaching out to people, it's much more intimate. It's much more personal. You're having one-on-one conversations. And for me, it was startling aware of, we keep saying these events are big and open to the public, but I now realize who's missing when I'm having to go through a list and reach out to people individually. It was very aware to me what parts of our community we still weren't serving. We're serving a lot, but there's people that aren't at the table. And when we talk about the idea of weaving, especially in COVID, I know you and I talked about what's a weaver versus a connector, because connectors have always been around, and they see two ideas that should work together, and they connect them, and they make something great. But the whole idea of a weaver is you're creating something that can't be seen. You've got the idea of the tapestry, and you've got the idea for the finished product, and you're just working with the threads. And I think COVID has made us all a weaver, because no one knows what we're going to see, what's going to be the end, and what does our world look like. So I encourage you to be more imaginative in however you're trying to relate with people or talk with people. There's no rule book right now. I think we're all just trying to see what's going to come out of it.
One of the things you talked about earlier was that your home had become kind of a hangout. It was a place. So there's a value in place where people feel safe. And True has certainly created that with the idea of the barber shop, where a lot of people feel safe. You lost the ability to really host large groups of people in your home.
Yeah.
And how have you figured out a new way of doing place in this time?
So that's been a really hard thing for me. I actually live alone, so this has been a quarantine then by myself, and I love people. My house is normally full all the time, and people still stop by because I am lucky enough to have a backyard. That's what I really hope comes out of COVID is folks living in cities that are currently quarantined in their apartments look at places like rural North Carolina and start understanding the value of what really matters. So fortunately, we were able to still do things, where people can gather in outdoor spaces distantly apart. Um, and then through a tap room, the Stardust Cellars tap room, which is located in Wilkes County and does a lot of work as far as supporting the community. We run different nonprofit events where we host and donate back to various nonprofits in our community. And in light of COVID, what we've done is created a small business contactless hub. So folks are able to actually order from our local coffee shop, dog supply. We have a produce farm, meat farm, and just various soap makers. And you can stop and place your order for the week. And on Saturdays, when you drive through, we meet you with masks, gloves, loaded in your car for you. So it's a contactless way of you supporting all of your small businesses in one stop. So for me, that has become my new socialization, is standing 10 feet away on a sidewalk, waving at folks as they come through. And I am amazed at how no one seems in a rush. You start talking and people angle their feet away, turn their shoulders. You can see all the cues. There is nobody that is in a rush now. Everybody wants to stop and they want to talk. So I've just been reaching out to anyone I think through. I sometimes just scroll through and see who's online and just start video chatting. Friends I haven't talked to since college, my peers within my fellowships, which I find funny when I call them. They're like, "So what's the point of this call?" And I was like, I was just wanting to talk. Like it's not really business for me. And I think that's what we're going to need more of that one-on-one, because I think when we're able to get back in community, it's going to change how deeply we're connected to each other.
Some people would say, some people are tuning into this and they're saying, what are you talking about? I'm talking to people all the time. And one of the points I think that you've made in the past is that it's not just about talking to people who absolutely agree with you. It's about talking to people who disagree with you and what you learn from those. And True referred to that a little bit earlier. Can you talk about the importance of being in conversation with people that you disagree with?
Absolutely. My town is politically very different than myself as far as the data of how we register and how we vote. And I think that's so important because you're constantly having to think and defend your own opinion. And a lot of times I've had broad ideas or thoughts or plans that I was adamantly behind, and someone starts poking holes in it. And you feel yourself puff up and be ready to defend. And I realized I can't on some of them, that it was just a bad idea. And having someone challenge that led us to a better idea. And more importantly, I have peers, working in this environment who, in light of, for years have been, I won't watch the NFL because of Colin Kaepernick. I don't believe in this. This is overblown. And after this week, they go, I get it. I get it. And they're reaching out to say, how do we have conversation? Because it is, again, not my place to host or lead that conversation. I feel like as a white person who is infinitely privileged to lead those, but I'm happy if there is another white person that needs help to at least guide you to resources and try to help you hear the voices that you haven't, because people only have these ignorant or biased views because you're not hearing those voices. And I don't mean ignorant or biased as solely conservative views. We have plenty of ignorant and biased progressive views. And I think until we can immerse ourselves in challenging conversation, until you can be ready to what I call learn aggressively, it's not arguing, you're just having an aggressive learning session with each other. And I realize that disagreeing with each other in no way, shape, or form takes away from each other's humanity.
Let me turn to you, because this has been a week. And a lot of the work that you've done in the past in Cary has been about the relationship between the community and law enforcement. And this would be a week when I assume you would be having some conversations about what's going on. And you can't have those in the same way. And I'm wondering how you're thinking about what's going on nationally, and the need that some people are going to have to talk about that.
Yeah, there is a desperate need to have conversation right now based on what's going on nationally, in all areas. From a public safety standpoint, from a social justice standpoint, from a health and human services standpoint, from an economic growth and development standpoint. You name it, right? There is a desperate need to really allow people the space and opportunity to collaborate so that we can leverage the collective intelligence on how we can best move forward to address all of these issues. I can't tell you how many messages I've received in the last 48, 72 hours about people saying, wow, if we've ever needed a rap session, we need one right now. And that's been addressed through several one-on-ones, a number of these types of calls, some Zooms, some chat groups, some separate chat sessions. People are part of different chat groups, and I'm a number of quite a few that feel the need to address this. I had a Zoom call with a professional sports team yesterday, and again, it lets me know how important it is to have these conversations, simply because of how therapeutic they can be for people who are dealing with stresses and traumas. And more often than not, these are it's untreated trauma. And it's therapeutic in a way that it allows people to know that other people are dealing with it as well. Other people are going through it as well. And so there's a healing component to that. But a lot of times it's just allowing people to express themselves and express their pain, their anger, their frustration, and their confusion. And we need that as social beings. We need that. And so it's been done through, and it's been a challenge, quite candidly. It's been a challenge. And it's been done through other virtual means of all the things that I've talked about: chat groups, Zoom calls, WebEx sessions, phone calls. But the thing that's important that we should all remember, and I've heard it referenced in different ways during this call, is that, and I know the term is social distancing, but it's more physical distancing, right? If you really break it down to 6 feet, I would encourage us all to not allow ourselves to fall into a behavior of socially distancing ourselves, because as leaders, which we all are, it's important that we remember that it's times like this when we should truly evaluate our success by the impact that we make on the lives of those that need us most. And it's people that need that outlet, need that engagement, need that conversation, need a sense of comfort and stability in times that are the most unstable and in times that are most in flux for them that it may have ever been. And so these conversations in this format have what I found to be probably among the most impactful, because although it's virtual, you can still see other human beings' faces, right? And get an opportunity to see to kind of see and feel and experience their passion as much as you possibly can without being physically in each other's presence. But it's challenging, Leslie, particularly with what's been going on recently.
You've created something that I haven't seen anyone else do, and that's a prayer meeting with your son. And I haven't been part of it, and your son looks a little bit younger. But can you talk a little bit about that and why prayer is so important right now?
That happened pretty organically. And it's been such a blessing for me as someone who is strongly rooted and connected in my faith. And I think it started out because there are people in my life who know that about me and that have been struggling with the COVID-19 pandemic and have just reached out to me as a friend and said, Drew, I'm struggling. Can you pray for me? Can you pray with me? And so that happened enough times where I realized, wow, it's probably more than just these handful of people that are in need of prayer and need to be comforted by prayer. So I was led to start a Facebook Live prayer session and I do it every weekday morning at 8 a.m. And the first time I did it, of course, I had no idea if anyone would show up, who would show up, if anyone at all. And people showed up. I just didn't even announce it. I just started, and I told a few people that I had already prayed with independently that I would do it if they wanted to join me. And then people just started showing up. And what's interesting, right, is what I believed I was doing for other people has turned out to be an incredible blessing for me. And even though I didn't realize it, I probably needed it more than anybody else. And it's turned out to be an incredible blessing for me. And because I am operating in the capacity of homeschool teacher and homeschool principal and homeschool cafeteria aide and homeschool guidance counselor, I'm here with my son every day. And so that now has just become a natural part of our daily routine. And what gets me encouraged and excited is that he looks forward to it. And so there are days where he wants to actually read the scripture. And depending on how long it is, he may look at it and say, "Oh, that's a long one, Daddy. You read that one." Right. And it's been a blessing because for me, again, someone that's rooted in my faith, the one thing that I believe and that I have been able to share with others is that of all of the instability that's taking place, of all the uncertainty that's taking place, people are clamoring and are desperate for something that is consistent. They are looking for some form of stability and consistency in their lives, just anything that they can find. And what I believe has created an appeal based on this morning prayer call is from generation to generation, people now realize that they can stand on and trust the consistency of God's word and his promises.
Thank you, True. We're going to get back to everybody in just a second. I wanted to spend a little bit of time with Cyrus, though, because certainly the consistency of college life, you were a member of the men's soccer team. There's a rigor and a rhythm to college life normally that goes on that was taken away. And we talked a little bit about that earlier. But also, I just wanted to layer in, Cyrus, that college conversations historically it's been a place where you come, you collide with people, you run into folks that you disagree with, you have healthy conversations, you learn something, they learn something. Over the past 5 years, at least, it seems like college conversation has gotten maybe less robust, that people aren't talking across lines. They're sort of avoiding people who disagree with them. I'm wondering if you've noticed that while you've been at NC State.
Well, I can say that I can't really compare it to 5 years ago because I've only been in school for 3 years. But just knowing how I've navigated that personally, I definitely noticed that the people around me, the people I'm talking to, and engaging in these kind of conversations more naturally with, tend to agree with me and reinforce my own perspectives and beliefs. But what we found is that by creating space for these conversations and intentionally trying to bring people from different backgrounds and different beliefs together, we're kind of reinvigorating that robust conversation like you were talking about, where we were working with Pete Crow from Better Angels. And so their organization has their own models that they follow pretty closely, but working with college Democrats and college Republicans, it was kind of like, as long as we get people in the room together, we'll be able to have those types of conversations without too much structure, too much pushing in one direction. So I think something that's been really encouraging about that is it seems like people want to have these conversations when they're in that space. They naturally have those conversations. So the big project for us, or the big goal for us, is to get people in those spaces, create an environment where people will want to come bring themselves, bring their perspectives, and learn from others, as LB was talking about. And so that's something that is encouraging for us. And moving forward in the fall, that's going to be really what we're trying to spread throughout campus.
It's going to be tricky though, because normally you might just rent out a big room and get 100 people in there, and they would have those conversations. How have you thought through accomplishing that when you can't have that same kind of density? Is it a series of smaller meetings, or how do you accomplish that?
So that's something that we're currently trying to work out. Meeting with Dr. Odom from she's the director of the Caldwell Fellows, and then we have a group of faculty and staff that are working together to launch what we're calling the Campus Conversations project. And so we were just able to put together a proposal talking about our evaluation of the needs on campus for this, some of our goals, some of the models we might look to use. And the main one that we've used in the past and that we're looking to use is the living room conversations model, which I know you're familiar with because I got it from IEI. So I think the big thing about since the pandemic has started has been it's given us time to put together a plan, whereas before it was kind of let's have a conversation, then let's plan another one maybe with a different group. But this has kind of been time to get all of our heads together, have a few meetings, put together a cohesive proposal, so that moving forward we're able to have a plan for in-person meetings using Zoom or other tools to meet virtually. I think the biggest challenge is spreading the intention or developing a culture that appreciates and wants to engage in these types of conversations. And as long as we're able to kind of push that goal, I think the means by which we accomplish it will kind of take care of themselves as long as people want to engage in it.
Thank you, Cyrus. Look forward to seeing what comes out of this at NC State. I know there are a lot of campuses across the U.S. that are thinking about similar things and trying to figure out how to make that work in time. The other thing we're heading toward this fall, obviously, is a more deeply and richly politically loud environment. And as we transition into this next segment, I really just wanted to show some of the figures that are out there when we're looking at what's going on with civility and the political nature of it. These are some stats that Pearce quoted in a USA Today opinion column at the top. Almost everyone agreeing that incivility is a problem in the US. Some people saying it's a crisis, a lot of people thinking it's getting worse, and a decent percentage of people in both counties saying it would really just be better if members of the opposing party just died. So that seems like we're getting to a fairly dire state, and certainly there's going to be a lot more rancor that comes up over the next few months as the elections get going. On the other hand, there is optimism among some people, belief that differences can be overcome, and people saying, yes, I'd be willing to step forward and set a good example. A recent poll from the More in Common survey finds that during COVID, there's been a decline of people who believe we live in a divided society. So on some level, it could be that this crisis is helping people to realize that maybe politics isn't as important as it historically has been. So let me just turn back to our guests and maybe start with you, Pearce, since you've thought so much about this. Is the pandemic making things better when it comes to political divisions? Is it whomping people upside the head and having them realize that this is something that we need to get over? Hold on just a second. There we go.
Absolutely, it has, and I was so encouraged by that research from our friends at More in Common. Everything they put out is so rich. I think on its face, right there, we're seeing that for those of us regular Americans, absolutely the sense of unity, the sense of togetherness, the sense that indeed we have more in common than separates us, has really permeated to a depth across all of what they call the tribes, the 7 tribes, with one exception, has really built in a way that, and I was literally talking about this on our senior team call yesterday, how many billions of dollars it would take for us to have the impact that coronavirus has had. I have to admit, and I'm often accused of being Pollyannish, but I fear that we will lose some of that. In fact, I'll be more blunt. We will lose some of that. But I hope we don't lose all of it. You know, we saw in after 9/11 that, you know, President George W. Bush's approval rating went over 90%. That's completely unthinkable these days, regardless of who's in the White House. So we've certainly seen over decades, I won't go on the whole tangent of the whys, but we've seen the colors we're wearing, whether it's partisan or across any other lines, really come to define our identities and really come to entrench us. And we're more often defined by what we aren't, by who that other is that we're opposing. I'm so grateful that in what's broadly called asteroid theory, and you all probably heard me talk about, you know, in the past, hey, I hope it doesn't take a war or a terrorist attack. Pandemic wasn't on that list of things we had thought about, but I'm grateful that asteroid theory has held. The real quick picture there is, you know, you and I, you know, maybe LB and I disagree vociferously about X, Y, and Z policy issue. And we are having, I love that, LB, we are having an aggressive learning session. But then we look up into the sky and there's an asteroid coming. Well, all of a sudden we're shoulder to shoulder, probably closer than 6 feet, and we're on the same team. And I think there has been a great sense of that as the asteroid, if you will, has been the coronavirus, which doesn't know color, whether that's partisan colors or skin colors or any other stripe. We certainly see in our leadership across the board a tendency back towards the division, a tendency back towards the us versus them. And that's scary. It's scary that we have a national election coming up in just a few months. So don't have much time to be unified when one party or another wants to win. So incredibly encouraged by More in Common's work. Really a breath of fresh air in light of what in the news never got but so united. The blame game was entrenched within maybe a week or two. And honestly, my passion and my drive is to see that what More in Common has found remains closer to the new normal than not.
LB, what can change out of this? What can be different? How can we reimagine how we talk to each other out of this? What have we learned?
I think when we are saying, what have we learned out of this? To the point of COVID doesn't know race, color, political affiliation. This is a shared experience. This is a shared language. This is something we can all talk about. You know, in 50 years, when someone makes a reference to a mask or 6 feet, we're all going to get it. So I think that for so long, we've been in that rugged individualism of me. And this is a shared experience for all of us, something we're all going through. And I think that's going to really help us do that mind switch of when you meet people and you do disagree with them, which happens often and regularly. Well, what do you agree on? You know, where is our common ground? I will go down a list forever of people. Well, what's your favorite song? Okay, well, what's your favorite food? And just eventually get to something that we've got in common. Because it is, our differences are very small. We just yell them the loudest. And so I hope that, again, to Pearce's point, we just remember that moving forward. And personally, with my love of rural communities and the need that we all have to break out of our silos, I hope that this transition to remote work, I hope that people understanding you can live where you want and still have the same opportunities that are supposedly constrained to cities, that you can come back to these towns and these places who are living the communities you're trying to create in urban environments.
It's true, and I 100% agree that this is a somewhat indifferent disease in terms of who it attacks, but it does disproportionately seem to be impacting older people, people of color, people who are lower income. And so at the same time that it's kind of ambivalent about who it attacks, on a percentage basis, it does seem to be affecting some groups more than others. And I'm
Oh,
wondering if that creates the schism that enables us to sort of say, well, it's not for me. I don't have to pay particular attention to it.
yeah, I think I still see that a lot of people who aren't concerned, I guess. But I think that we're, again, hearing that amplified more than it's actually being said, or the more that people feel that. I know here, I'm based in Wilkes County, and that was our original. This isn't anything to worry about. Nobody's concerned. This isn't going to be a problem, except we have a Tyson chicken plant, and it was a problem. And it became the number one hotspot for daily growth rates in the nation. And so I think that, it's, even if you don't, I think, again, you're going to hear people who say like, oh, I'm not that concerned. It's not a big deal. They're just yelling louder. I don't think there's more of them. And I think the more we kind of focus on those like loudest voices, the more we're going to miss the big picture. And I think really what's going to come out of COVID is the idea back on resiliency over perfection. Because to be something great is not to be perfect. The Romans were perfect for a while, but weren't exactly resilient about it. And I hope that we start looking at what are the things we're doing because we think it's the idea of perfection. We think it's the idea of success. We think it's American values. And what is the true resilient change over time, bearing down the odds? Who are we going to be after this? And I hope we really all take a look, inside our communities and selves and say, like, what is the change? Because that is resiliency, is changing when it gets hard and finding a new path forward. And I think this is the great reset for us to do that.
Drew, who are we going to be after this? How are we going to come out of this different and better and stronger? What do we need to do to accomplish that?
Well, thanks for the question, Leslie. And it's a great question. And it is my hope that we understand that diversity comes in many forms, and that it's incumbent upon us all to embrace the gift of diversity that is available to us. And one of the things that I've done during this time is started a video series for some of my partners and clients, if you will, and identify a topic and send them a 2 to 3 minute video each week on that topic. And then we would gather at the end of the month to have a group discussion about the content that was shared as people took the time to digest that content and understand how it applies to their lives. And one of the things that we talked about was cognitive diversity and how we all think differently and have different thinking styles, and how we are vulnerable to a knowledge gap when we are dismissive of someone else's thinking style simply because it does not line up with ours, and how our cognitive diversity is informed by our identity diversity. I am required to navigate the world differently than you because I am a Black man in America, so that it informs the lens through which I see the world and how I approach problem solving. Our experiential diversity, as if LB as a woman is required to navigate the world differently and has had different life experiences than me, and that has informed how she thinks and views the world, that experiential diversity. And then we have our neurodiversity, that our thinking ability, whether that's ADD, whether that's you're on the spectrum of autism, ADHD, dyslexia, whatever it is, we understand that we all have differences, but there's so much value in those differences. And then we all have biases that is not an indictment on us. So as, and I'm encouraged by Pearce's data that it has brought us closer together in some ways, because although I was encouraged in the beginning of this pandemic that this tragedy was bringing us together, I quickly began to see it being politicized and creating lines of division. If you are in the stay-at-home camp, then you are in one political affiliation. If you are the reopen camp, you are part of another political affiliation. And so I saw new lines of division being created as we politicized this pandemic. And it's really people's life experiences, people's identity diversity, because there are more vulnerable communities that have been affected more intensely by this pandemic. So, of course, people are going to view reopening, staying home differently. So let's not be dismissive of other people's realities and life experiences simply because they are not our own. So that is my hope, Leslie. Now, I know your question was, how are we going to be different coming out of this? That's still to be determined.
Let me just thank you for that. Let me turn to just a couple of the questions we've gotten. Lori Gilchrist mentions that one of the things that this has given some people is an empathy for those who have long been socially isolated. That some people who have had the privilege of not being in that camp now have a deep appreciation of what that's like and maybe a deeper understanding. And one of the items that came up in our mental health conversation that we had a couple of weeks ago is that greater sense of empathy, perhaps, that people are now aware of mental health challenges in ways that they haven't been in the past, and that might make them more empathetic in the future. I'm wondering if anyone has thoughts about that.
I have seen that begin to take place where people are becoming more empathetic and compassionate towards others because they have now seen the tragedy and seeing the suffering of firsthand, where they would not have even considered it before because it wasn't a part of their reality. So I think people are realizing that they are fortunate and they are blessed in some regards, as particularly when, and I've had a number of conversations. I was talking to a friend yesterday, and he says, man, I've never used a caveat as much as I have when I've had conversations, whether or not I'm talking about something good in my life or bad in my life. And the caveat is always, well, look, I know it can be worse, and you're hesitant to talk about the good things because you are now so aware of the tragedies that so many other people are experiencing. And so I laughed when I thought about that, because I found myself using the caveats, if you will, when I talk about my current situation. And if I'm frustrated or complaining about something that is real to me, I just look to what's happening to my friends and brothers and sisters in New York. And I realize, wow, you know what? I can truly empathize with what's going on there. So I think us having the opportunity, and I hate to use that word, to really see firsthand how other people are suffering, I believe is going to create a greater level of empathy in some people. Now, at least that's what I'm seeing happening already.
Pearce, how do we come out of this better? How do we make sure that when we emerge, we don't backslide into the same rancor that we were in before? What do we need to do to make sure that we come out of this different and better?
Yeah. You know, the idea of creeping normalcy has come to mind a lot. It's incredible how quickly dramatic things, and really it's a testament to the marvel that is human beings, that we can adapt and often make things work. But I've long said that, and for me, as many of you know, it was on a bus in Africa in 2013. I think I've seen more and more people have that moment where whatever our convictions are, whatever our positions are, whatever our animosities are towards other positions, and unfortunately increasingly people, we reach this moment where we say, you know, there's something more fundamentally broken here. There's something at the societal, cultural, democratic level that is not going to serve us individually, our communities, our nation well going forward. And so I'm hoping that this pandemic gives many more people that conviction that it's time to turn the tide of rising rancor and deepening division, to move from isolation to connection. And as True mentioned, you know, some of us, you know, maybe more of us now than than ever lean on Scripture and a higher power. For me, that's leaning heavily on my faith in God and Christ. And a Bible verse that's been giving me hope recently says, "I am doing a new thing. Now it springs forth. I will make a way in the wilderness and rivers in the desert." And for me, that speaks to the redeeming possibility through this pain. And as my partner David Brooks, who we've mentioned, has said, we are in a valley now. It's an opportunity for a new birth. So, my hope and my encouragement to all of us is that together we help create those rivers out of this desert, that we catalyze that new birth for our neighbors and our nation. I love what LB said about the Great Reset. Incidentally, I'm part of a group right now of leaders who are figuring out what that Great Reset could look like across many pillars. The pillar I'm a part of is weaving community and bridging divides, but that is happening. People are very intentionally looking at what that could look like. And I'm so grateful that the Weaving Community Campaign has already reached 7.5 million people without any investment. And now very grateful that Facebook is coming behind us with great force to try to reach many more of those people. And as we talk about empathy and how we can care for those who are and maybe long have been isolated, there's a bunch of different ways and ideas of how to connect and care and create at weaving.us. And I would also ask everybody here to put themselves on the map there. Let us know how you're weaving community. Allow us to celebrate you. Share it on social media with the hashtag, those 3 prompts. What are you experiencing now? How are you caring for yourself and others? And what life do we want beyond the pandemic? And the final note, just now, kind of a campaign within a campaign, from Memorial Day to July 4th, we recognize that there's a segment of our population that knows a lot about trauma. And we've all heard about post-traumatic stress, but I've learned recently that our friends in active service and our veterans, they like to talk more about post-traumatic growth. And so we're now part of a month of Brave Connection, which we're bringing together civilians and veterans and members of the military to talk about.
Pierce, we're running out of time here. We've given the website, and there's so much going on. This could be a 2-hour conversation. Let me just quickly turn to Cyrus to give us one word of hope. Pearce talked about post-traumatic stress disorder. How do we make sure for college students that doesn't happen? What needs to happen this fall?
Well, I think if we can come out of this a little bit humbled, because we often get caught up in our day-to-day, the tasks that we have to do, pushing ourselves to be productive. If we can be humbled and kind of humanize other people and return to campus more willing to be open and vulnerable to share our stories, share how we coped, then I think that's a big step on how we can relate and reconnect to each other.
All right. Thanks for that closing message of hope. Thanks to all of you for the hopefulness that you're giving, not just to those who are listening today, but all those that you're working with. Really appreciate the ongoing work that you've done. That is our show. I'd like to thank our guests, True Pettigrew, LB Prevette, Pearce Godwin, and Cyrus Rad. If you have ideas or just want to comment on today's show, or if you have ideas about other emerging issues we should take on in the future, I hope you will share those with me. Next week, the title of this series is changing slightly as we begin to reopen the economy. We're going to start a series called Jumpstart. Each week, we'll be talking to people who are responsible for jumpstarting critical parts of North Carolina. Next week, we'll be joined by Whit Tuttle, the Executive Director of Visit NC, Bill Cecil, President and CEO of Biltmore Estate, Jeff Edson, Head of Explore Elkin, and Duarte Moret, an Associate Professor of Equitable and Sustainable Tourism at NC State. If you liked this show, I encourage you to direct people to our website to see the recording of it. It's going to be available on Friday at noon. We also have podcasts that come out every Tuesday morning. This week, we talk with Lori Thomas and James Ford about a new series on the racial elements of the wealth gap in Charlotte. Next week, we talk with Jordan Roberts of the John Locke Foundation about a new report he's written with the Brookings Institution about telehealth in North Carolina. For all those, just go to our website, emergingissues.org. And that's our show. Thanks to Lowe's for sponsoring this week and all the month of May. First in Future is produced by James Herrick and Greg Hedgepath. Thanks to Kirsten Chang for helping get the word out and keep our chat going. Renee Potts helps with slides. Simone Coleman helped with research this week. I'm Leslie Boney. Please stay safe. See you in the future.